Hey there everybody, and welcome back to the 90s. Nirvana just hit it big on the airways, the AIDS crisis is in full swing, and, Bill Clinton is president and playing smooth jazz to make people think he is cool and ignore all the horrendous stuff that he's getting up to. And jumping onto the airwaves is another thing, a show that would soon become one of the defining teenager-oriented hits of the decade, Boy Meets World. A Disney original series before Disney original series were a thing, about an adolescent boy named Cory's coming of age, and all the trials and tribulations that go along with discovering yourself and your identity in that period of life. Supported by his friends Sean and Topanga, as well as getting aid and direction from his teacher George Feeney. Over the course of the show, we see Cory go from a middle schooler all the way through to an adult leaving college. And yes, Mr. Feeney does happen to be a consistent theme throughout the show, which is sort of weird that this guy's teacher, almost followed him from institution to institution. I get it. It could just be a coincidence that career changes happen or career advancements happen, and this is potentially a logical progression, but still, strange that happens. Now, I never really watched Boy Meets World back in the day, mostly because I wasn't born when it came out, and I was 3 years old when it finished. But even then, I didn't really catch it on the Disney Channel. I know some people really had that whole brand loyalty thing of Nickelodeon versus Disney, the mouse versus the slime, but for me, I just watched whatever shows happened to come on the Cartoon Network, or were available on the UK/New Zealand kids channels, which ended up meaning an incomplete roster of all these shows that are apparently so fundamental to the US's mindset that they got sequels and spin-offs 20 years later. I never really had brand loyalty as much as I had brand laziness, and so I wanted to start digging into these American classic shows for kids to match my similar interest in cartoons for teenagers/young adults. And with that said, I think we should probably get into this video about the Trans Boy Meets World episode. Oh, damn. No, I did not just do that to you, poor and innocent audience members. What an absolute joke this channel is. I'm gonna get reamed in the comments for this one. Okay, look, it was kind of hyperbole, or lying some might say, because it's not explicitly a trans episode. It's more of a guys dressing up and pretending to be women for a variety of purposes episode. But if you can forgive me for doing a falsity on you in the title and thumbnail, I think I might be able to prove why the episode Chick Like Me is actually a tiny little bit actually pretty transgender. Chick Like Me is the 15th episode of season 4. Right around the mid-period of the high school years for the boy who is meeting the world. Although, as you might see, this episode could be considered a little bit more of a girl meets world. Wait, that was the title of the recent spin-off. Fuck. Stupid shows stealing my jokes and punchlines. Can I have nothing? American media was taking all of my free time and brain energy. Not enough for you? Let me at least have these bits. But fine. Anyways, as you might guess from that statement and from its inclusion on this channel, there is a little bit of gender fuckery that goes on in this episode. Some gender embodiment or role swapping that would make it leave an indentation on the minds of the impressionable young people who would be watching it, especially the trans young people that would be watching it. So let's actually go over this episode, moment by moment, and figure out what's going on here and whether it should be something to care about and to look back on fondly, or to cringe over and wish it never happened. Oh, also, I would apologise for the quality of the video clips in this video essay, but you gotta remember, this is a show from the 1990s that apparently nobody is putting up on the internet in a downloadable place at a quality above 360p. So I'm doing the absolute best I can here for you. I legitimately tried to buy it, but it's like not on any New Zealand marketplace. It would have taken like 5 months to wait for it on Amazon, so that's just not happening. So the episode begins with our main boy characters reading the school newspaper, a thing which I only ever really see in US media like Riverdale, or honestly all I can think about here is Riverdale, which is a pretty common occurrence around that show, because in all the schools I've been to in the UK and New Zealand, there has never been a student newspaper or hobby group. No place for budding journalists to discover just how much they hate being journalists, and that the glamorous life of finding scandals and revealing truths is a big ol' lie that covers up the fact they will mostly be doing research on pointless little things that mean nothing to pretty much everybody. But anyway, our boys are reading the school newspaper because Cory writes articles in it, and is showing off his opinion pieces to Sean. To which Sean tells him that shouldn't they want to cover something with a little more meat, a little more substance, a little more about how the girls' swim team should be wearing high heels. Boys in the 90s, although they'll be boys, right? But Topanga and one of her friends, who I don't know the name of yet because I have not watched the show before and I only really got invested in the main characters who exist, so she kind of slipped me by. Well, they enter the scene and begin talking about an experience that Topanga's friend was having with a boy, with her dealing with the frankly too common situation of a guy seeing a dinner or a date with a girl as just the quickest route to get into her pants, and nothing more than that. Girls in the 90s will just be treated like pieces of meat like every other fucking decade, apparently. The girls continue to talk about how this impacts on... Okay, I think her name is Debbie's desire to continue dating, because how many more douchebags does she have to deal with, and why can't everybody go into a date wanting the same things? To which they then approach and ask the lads what's going through their minds when it comes to going out with somebody. Sean and Debbie then get into a really interesting conversation about how guys approach this thing, with Debbie pointing out that just because she agreed to go on a date does not mean she is required to make out with somebody, and that her desire to do so is linked more to that making a genuine connection. And Sean complains that, well, girls don't make it very clear that they don't want to make out, or that they do want to make out. Which, I mean, yeah, I guess I have seen plenty of guys like this. Probably way too many back in high school, to be honest. And I mean, shit. I've been guys like that. And I've also been girls in the same situation. And I've also been an ascended gender that looks at this whole thing and goes, Jesus fucking Christ, who'd want to do that? But the really important bit from this conversation to me is when Debbie tells Sean this. Now, that is a really interesting concept that the show leans into, and makes a joke about, because it's a coming-of-age comedy. But the idea behind that is a really fascinating one. Guys do often approach dating like a game, like a sport, where they need to make plays and tactics and strategy to ultimately win, rather than treating the other person like a human and working from there. The scene ends with Topanga and Debbie telling Cory that he should write his column about something that matters, like how guys suck on dates. Which is, I mean, foreshadowing is the wrong word here, because, I mean, that's the topic of the entire goddamn episode. It's not foreshadowing anything, because we know that's what's going to happen. But this is the build-up right here. That's the tells telling us, oh, this is the way the show is going today. Our next scene in a classroom opens with Mr. Feeney talking about how a white man named John Griffith darkened his skin with pigment to research the life of a black man during the 1960s. And I know that this whole scene is part of that build-up continuing, because Cory asks about how wouldn't it have just been easier for John to ask black people what it was like to be them, and Mr. Feeney talks about how there was such distrust between the races that the only way he could write this book was to do it himself and to effectively sneak into the black community for 6 weeks. But because I looked this all up, and I found out it's a very real story and a very real book that very much really happened, we've got to make a brief stop here. Now, there is so much to think about here. In fact, I think I mean it's an uncomfortable scenario in almost its entirety. John Griffith was explicitly told that he should be honest with people about what he was doing if they asked. But a large part of the book is people looking at him and going, well, that's a black man, no further questions. So he's lying by omission to many, many people that he is a black man, and not telling them that he is a white man, pretending to be a black man until the book comes out. And yeah, it would have been better to have black people explain the black experience in America, but at the same time I think we need to recognise that nobody would listen to them if they did, and that's because nobody was listening to them when they did. It would take a white man pretending to be black and then discussing it for white people to care, or to even begin to think about it. And isn't that the biggest fucking bummer in this video so far? But in regards to the build-up, I think from this you can see the line that gets drawn here by Sean explicitly in this scene from hearing that story, to them deciding that, well, Cory should dress up as a girl and live as a girl for a bit to experience what it is like to be a girl. And that way, guys will finally listen to him about how shitty they are being in the newspaper, because they sure as shit are not listening to the women, right? These kinds of investigative journalisms I don't necessarily agree with in their intention, because they don't fix the main clear problem at play there. A big problem was that white America would not care or listen to the black community, and that boys would not care or listen to what girls were saying. Circumventing that by play acting as them to find out their problems doesn't change that. It instead just keeps allowing you to not listen to that community about what they're experiencing, because now you have a reference point that isn't from them. Sorry for getting lost in the weeds on this one, and kind of completely losing track of the Boy Meets World episode, but I did really want to hone in on this entire thing, because it is a big premise of the episode. I promise, we're going to get into some gender fuckery any second now. Some egg-cracking moments in just a tick. The scene in the classroom ends with Cory committing to the idea when he discovers that John Griffith became very successful and well known after his book was published. Which, I mean, the politics of this again is not making me very happy. The intentions of Cory going into this are flawed. Are based on personal success and achievement rather than wanting to reveal the wrongs in the world. Also, Mr. Feeney telling Cory what happened to John after the publishing of Black Like Me is a little wrong, because while John did do very well financially and careerly afterwards, he also did get beat with chains by a group of white men for his role in writing the book, and ended up in hospital for 6 months. That's a pretty important part of the whole story, I think, that the show didn't put in because, I guess, addressing the horrifying ramifications of race relations in the USA is something the USA likes to talk about in more overarching terms that avoids the specific targeted violence of white people towards anything that challenged the hierarchy they benefited from and the worldview supported by it. But we jump to our next scene. God, do we have to jump to the next scene before I spend another 10 minutes talking in spirals when we haven't even got a quarter of the way through the fucking episode yet. The next scene that is relevant to us, and yes, I am skipping past the whole B-plot of Eric and his work friend trying to help her learn the ways of hunting and tracking city boys, because she is a rural girl who likes to talk about taking interested men eel hunting while punching them on the shoulder rather vigorously. I don't know which acts I'm doing here, I'm kinda getting lost, but honestly that makes her seem like the coolest fucking person ever. But our next actual scene is when Cory and Sean get back to Cory's house, and his father wants to know what was happening with Cory's day, because Cory never tells him details about what's going on with him. And Cory then drops the big bombshell comedic line about how today he decided to be a girl. Shit, Cory, look, my pal, we've all been there and having to finally tell our parents the truth about ourselves and our identity, and Cory's father takes this statement as a sign for him to stop taking an interest in his child's going-ons, which, if this had been a trans thing rather than just becoming a girl for an article, certainly would not have been the best response to your kid coming out. They explain the premise of what they're doing to Cory's parents, and as this goes on, the father continues to show an uncomfortable attitude towards the whole thing and the entire idea. A common reaction from men towards anything that breaks the hierarchical conception that they have of the male gender, wherein it is the top of the ladder and that any attempt, however temporary, to not be that is seen as weird or gross. While Cory's mother is more receptive to the notion that it would allow Cory to get insights that could serve him well for the rest of his life. Cory then drops the line that he isn't dressing up like a girl for the sake of dressing up like a girl, it's for journalism, and sure buddy, whatever you want to say to yourself. That's a bit. I'm making a joke. Please don't get too mad, straight cis people. I'm not trying to steal Cory from Boy Meets World away from you, alright? I'm just making a funnies here. Cory then ropes his girlfriend Topanga into helping him dress up as a girl. And okay, look, at this point this is more and more coming across as a trans thing. I'm not even trying at this point to insert it. There are no end of stories of married or dating people who, when their eggs broke, turned to the person they trusted the most to help them achieve or explore this new identity they were working with. And Topanga is perfectly happy and down with the whole idea, which is not 100% in line with everyone's experience of telling their partners they want to dress up as the other gender or try the other gender out or whatever way they might describe it to them. But I guess Topanga is just a cool and accepting person, which is tight. The two friends then spend a scene encouraging and assuring Cory that he should look fine and that he has to come out of the bathroom eventually, to which he does, and the first thing he drops when he steps out is how he knew he would look fat. Which I guess is a funny joke at how women hyperfixate on their weight, because the world makes them hyperfixate on it by making a woman's physical appearance and ability to be attractive to men the central part of who she is. And that while guys are more able to get away with putting on weight and it not becoming a big deal that they need to address, the same is not true for women or femme people. Trust me, I have seen and felt that exact same experience from both sides yet again. The uncertainty of how he looks, though, is something that the group works through. Topanga continues to be supportive in encouraging him that maybe it's just not the right colour, and that a big part of it is how you act and how you come across with what you are wearing. And god damn it, does Ally Topanga continue being a meme of this episode or what? I also have to say that it was a bold choice for Cory to wear heels on his very first outfit, because that shit ain't easy if you've not become accustomed to them. And yet, he does appear to be able to even do a little dance while walking around in them. You cannot tell me this man has not worn heels before. I call bullshit for the confidence he's displaying with that footwear. Shawn then gives off his best attempt to show how girls walk, and what air they carry when they do so. And I don't want to get too deep into the gender politics of that concept, because yes, of course, not all girls walk like this, or have grace, or whatever crap you want to say. But come on, it's a show from the 90s. And I'm hoping I can use that line until we get to the analysis bit of the video and to knock it all down to start considering this show in all seriousness, because this show is on the 90s is not a good excuse for anything, you know, at the end of the day. And the episode does a little twist on us, because Topanga and Cory then realise that the perfect person to force them was in the room with them the whole time. Our cross-dressing undercover agent is not going to be Cory for this episode, but in fact is Shawn, the boy who was unable to really empathise with or connect with Debbie earlier on due to his inability to see things from her point of view. See, the show did pull a twist on you, a twist that buys into the secret foundations that it already established, which I actually have to admit is pretty good writing. I'm actually really enjoying this episode and the characters in it so far. Boy Meets World is actually pretty good. I might have to go back and watch this show. We then jump to Shawn and Cory entering high school with Shawn dressed up in a very interesting number for a first time in girls' clothing. Certainly a bold choice that yet again is perfectly in line with what I've seen from trans women who kinda leap into the most femme clothing they can once they finally get the excuse to do so. Though I have to ask, what the hell's going on with her hair? Regardless, Shawn immediately notices how all the guys are staring at him, and Cory explains that, well, it's happening because Shawn's kind of a babe. It's kinda hot as fuck. And maybe at this point I'm starting to see how this episode did end up becoming a few of the older trans folks' egg-cracking moment. We're seeing a guy become a girl, and while it is being played for laughs during the show and for the studio audience, the show internal narrative itself is saying how he is looking attractive while doing so. I think that is a reassuring message for a lot of trans people who get told a lot by media and by assholes that if they ever transition, that they will never be looked at in a sexual or romantic way ever again. The fear that doing so consigns them to a life of lonely solitude for relationships. A fear tactic, plain and simple, that buys more and more into that big notion from people that the primary function of a woman is to be attractive, and that trans women will fail at that for whatever number of reasons it might be. But at its core, what this is trans misogyny, and is antithetical to the very notion of feminism, of breaking the gendered requirements of the established system. So it's reassuring to see Boy Meets World run with that narrative, with the idea that Shawn can dress as a girl and could look good doing so. And yet again, I've spent hundreds of words talking about 6 seconds of the episode because I have a problem that I have turned into a major hobby. But hopefully you're getting something out of it. The scene continues with Cory offering to carry Shawn's books to help create the illusion that Shawn is a girl, and Topanga then tells Cory that, well, he never carried her books, to which Cory says this line. Cory, my guy, what's going on with you? Are you into your best friend right now? Because if you are, it's totally cool, but also in this current place, queer as fuck. It's not gay for Cory to be into his male best friend when his male best friend is in the role of a woman, but it is definitely somewhere in that wild blue yonder of queerness that covers everything not nailed down to the floor of cis straightness. We then get our next trans-adjacent or trans-allegory and just plain trans scene, wherein they try and figure out Sean's girl name, and Cory suggests Janet, to which Sean declines. Cory is befuddled by why it matters what name Sean goes with, and Topanga leans in to say that Sean has clearly thought about his girl name before, and Sean agrees and says that it would be Veronica. Now, I ain't saying that Sean is trans, but this is some heavy transcoding shit right here. It is seeped in this scene, and honestly, I'm starting to really identify with Veronica as a character who connects with the community that I am from, the trans community. She might make it yet onto the board of trans representation, a board which doesn't always rely on the person being trans. Mr. Feeney then walks by and interacts with the group before noticing that Veronica is, well, Veronica, and leans in himself to say that if there's anything that they need, his door is always open and that he isn't here to judge them. Which is said in a tone that potentially implies some total fucking judgment, but at least there's the element of being accepting in that. I would like to personally believe that if Veronica was actually trans and came out, that Mr. Feeney would be one of those older boomer allies who maybe doesn't fully get it, but tries their best to be open-minded. I have never watched this show before, but he just gives off such nice warm energy that I hate to believe he's a bigot. Trust me, that line is going to come back to bite me in the ass in like 3,000 words. Then the plot advances, as the main target for this, I don't want to say trap because of all the connotations wrapped up in that particular word around, well, this exact situation, but I mean, they are planning to have Veronica literally trick a guy into dating her with the intention of getting information for an article. It's not real, and this guy will eventually probably have to find out that fact. And remember that whole thing earlier with John Griffith and how he got beaten nearly to death by a bunch of white men because he pretended to be black for a month? Well, in the real world, where consequences occur to people, and they don't get to just avoid the more cruel and brutal parts of bigotry and racism and transphobia like a kids show from the 90s does, how do you think that a guy might respond to finding out that the girl he dated and had sexual feelings for turned out to be another guy who tricked him? Regardless of whether that discovery is based on it literally being true, like in Boy Meets World, or it just being perceived as the truth, like so often happens to trans women. Well, I will tell you this right now, it is not a happy or a comfortable or a not terrifying experience to be in for the woman involved, and it does represent another pillar in the trans misogyny foundation, the threat and enactment of violence by men to realign the world to how they want it to be, by forcefully showing their emotional imbalance in their own sexuality at such discovery onto the body of another person. I'm dancing around it a lot here, but trans women are in a lot of danger of getting beaten up or killed by men. That's what I'm trying to say here, is that this situation can often lead to horrific violence towards trans people. But anyway, Jesus Christ, anyway, Veronica is introduced to Gary, the douchebag guy who hits on anybody with the intention of pumping and dumping. I wish I had written anything else there. And they hit it off, with both of them agreeing to a date on Saturday. Veronica or Sean or Ira, I think, because this is yet again not a case of a transitioning person or anything like that. It's Sean playing a role on the stage of gender for a purpose, regardless of how much Veronica might be getting into it, as we see her immediately leap to being upset that she has nothing to wear for the date. Typical girly girl stuff right there, worrying about your clothing. So Veronica and Gary go on their date to Chubby's. Chubby's. Really? Chubby's? Does that have a different connotation over in the USA or something? Because if you call a place Chubby's here, you might as well call it Chode or something, for fuck's sake. And the date is the most queer trans shit I can possibly imagine finding in the 90s in a kids show. Because Veronica is giving off the vibes and the attitude and the statements that all really align with a transgender identity and connect with the trans people who might be in the audience, or the eggs who might be seeing this as the first little crack in that shell. And I think there is clearly something in this scene where Sean as Veronica is putting themselves into their role, and in doing so is also allowing themselves to think things about themselves and their gender that may not make them feel perfectly comfortable, as indicated by their sudden leaping away from a conversation to wanting to get food, almost like a distraction from how heavily they were getting into being Veronica. What this really makes me think a lot of is Judith Butler's seminal work in third-wave feminist theory, the concept of gender performativity as laid out in Gender Trouble, Feminism and Subversion of Identity, and Bodies That Matter, on the discursive limits of sex, both of which did come out before Boy Meets World hit the airways, so I guess it's not completely impossible that they might have had an impact on the writing of this episode in particular. Gender performativity is in basic the idea that gender is the act of doing, that by performing a gender you are embodying that gender, that in effect the whole notion of becoming somebody is something that is influenced by a variety of factors that you then replicate and reproduce in your actions, and the gender you perform is both reflected by and reflective upon the internal reality and identity you ascribe to. Sorry if that got a little wanky for a second there. I always need to take a second to remind you people that I have studied sociology and media at a university level. And so at some deep psychological level, that stuff is always bubbling under everything I write. No matter how many times I might say the word fuck or make stupid little jokes to distract from it. But to get distracted even more heavily from the Boy Meets World episode here, I actually looked up the writer for this episode in particular to see if there was anything in there that might indicate some larger influences. And what I discovered about Stephen Hibbert honestly kinda scared me, and sort of also makes a lot of sense. See, Stephen Hibbert wrote It's Pat, the frankly insane movie about an androgynous gender-indifferent person and their androgynous gender-indifferent partner who has to deal with an obsessed neighbour who does whatever it takes to try and figure out what gender Pat is in a very unhealthy manner that ultimately ends with them stealing Pat's laptop and threatening them into undressing so they can see their genitals. It is kinda meant to be a slapstick comedy, but it lacked the humour required to pull that off. And I'm sure at some point I'll have to talk about that film further in depth, but I think you can see from the gender notions that go into that movie that maybe some sort of aligning ideas exist between this episode's queerness and that movie's queerness. Both versions of queerness from a straight cis man, I think, because all I know about him is that he's been married to women twice, and there's no other details on Stephen Hibbert, so, I think he's a straight cis man in the 90s who is doing the best that he can at that time, and his best is just kind of flawed. At least Boy Meets World is a kinder interpretation of queerness and cross-dressing and transness than It's Pat. At least we got that much. Okay, back to this fucking date, I swear I'm my own worst enemy for these watch reviews. I just get so lost in the weeds. I don't know how those bigger commentary channels manage to get through a whole movie without making it an hour long. And to come and take the food order for Veronica and Gary is Cory dressed up as a girl. Okay, wait. What the fuck is happening here? I have to assume that this is for the audience, that it's part of the comedy of the episode and exists as a bit, because otherwise there is no real reason for Cory to be doing this. Especially after they seemed so unhappy with it earlier on. Unless he saw Sean doing it, thought it looked fun, and wanted in on that action. The feminization of men in America truly does spread like a social contagion. I guess all those right-wing fuckwits were right. Damn you, Benneth Shapiro. But the appearance of Cora the waitress, the character that Cory is playing, seems to be a massive surprise to not just Veronica/Sean, but also to Topanga, who is, I guess, just keeping an eye on the operation. And that makes it more clear to me that this was something Cory did on a whim, and did not check in with anybody for. And all they do is just take the meal orders, make some weird ass comments towards both Gary and Veronica, and then leave the scene. There was not a bigger plan here, not a bigger requirement for this. They didn't need to step in to save the journalism operation. Cory just did it because they could, and they wanted to, and god damn it, I think Cory might also be making it onto the wall of trans icons that are not actually trans, but we stand them anyways for what they represent. What the fuck is this episode? So, Gary begins making the moves on Veronica, the not subtle at all moves, and Veronica tells him that she feels a little crowded, and that he can maybe back up, and he keeps pushing and starts rubbing her shoulder, and she tells him that she didn't ask him to do that, but he continues to act like a man who is well on his way to becoming President of the USA someday, or at the very least the head of a fraternity who complains about getting cancelled all because he sexually assaulted and harassed women. You know, just guys being guys. And Gary keeps pushing and pushing until Veronica has a go at him about the fact that he doesn't listen. And he doesn't appear to wait for consent or presumes consent because, well, I guess that's just the kind of dickhead Gary is. And is a horrifying indictment upon the lessons that we've taught teenage boys about other people's bodies. And Veronica then storms away from the date to convene with Cory/Cora, I still don't know what's going on there, and Topanga, who question her on why she left, to which she says this great line. Now that is some good writing, and a very good message to send to any guys in the audience. Veronica is at this point very clearly freaked out, and is not comfortable because of course she fucking isn't. And Gary then walks over and tries to smooth things over by saying he's sorry for being a little aggressive and that nobody respects women more than him. Ha! And that he wants forgiveness. Forgiveness in this place being more of like a way for him to move to his next step on the plan of getting laid. Rather than an actual moment of introspection and a desire to right the wrongs that he is engaged in. But y'all already knew that about Gary. We all know a Gary in our lives. With the pushing of Cora into doing it, Veronica agrees to go and play foosball with Gary to try and get the date back on track. Because remember, Cory is writing an article on this, and so I guess is being just a shitty fucking friend who is ignoring the state that Veronica is in here, and how they are clearly uncomfortable with this whole situation. I think Cory might be coming back off that trans icon wall. Only Veronica gets to stay there, because sisters need to stick together. Gary then mansplains the idea of foosball to Veronica, and Veronica whoops his ass before Gary then moves right back to being a handsy fucking creep as quickly as possible, while also making every terrible comment one could imagine. Oh, I can tell you want it because of how you dressed. Oh, okay, you don't like to be touched in the most passive-aggressive tone imaginable. Oh, I thought you were into guys. Why are you not okay with me invading your space? What are you, some kind of lesbian? Gary is the worst person, and I hope he gets some kind of comeuppance. I just hope it's not the comeuppance that I think that it could be. I'll reserve judgment, but if you're a long-time viewer or a person who has just watched any trans people in media in the past, you might be able to guess what I am afraid is coming here. But to that last comment, Veronica tells Gary straight up that yeah, she is into girls. And oh my god, can I put Veronica up on the trans wall twice? Is that an option? I'll need to check in with the Trans Agenda Council about that one. And then she proceeds to punch him in the face. Veronica is on the wall, in a fucking golden frame. I don't care what anybody else has to say about it, baby. Veronica is a fucking icon. She punches Gary. I don't even care what else happens in this episode. The show didn't do the thing I was worried of. It didn't have the comeuppance be that he got the trick revealed on him. That Gary got, ooh, you were actually maybe gay because I'm a man or whatever crap. The comeuppance was getting punched by a lady right after she tells him she's into girls, and I assume he would think that she's a lesbian, and that she is doing this for every girl she knows. Fuck yeah, Boy Meets World! Hell yeah! I'm way too excited about this. I've been let down so much by shows that anything doing even slightly well is just makes me way too happy. And Cory just comes and puts the icing on the cake by dropping the bill on Gary while he's on the floor before leaving with Veronica. Gal pals being gals temporarily and knocking toxic masculinity on its ass. Sisters do stick together. God damn it, they're all on the wall. Topanga, Cory, Veronica, Sean, Cora, whatever. They're all on there. They're all on it, I tell you. Okay? They get to be on there. And the episode goes to its conclusion with the article being released. Cory getting the recognition for it, Mr. Feeney making a comment about the disturbing pictures used on the front of the article, and come on, man, I stood up for you, Mr. Feeney, as an ally. Don't let me the fuck down now, you big old boomer. And Sean gets a date with Debbie because he learned more about how to be a girl and to see things from their perspective and to be a better person. Oh, and also right at the end we find out that Cory is apparently still wearing the hosiery under his regular boy clothes even after the article got published. So I guess that's just something we're always going to know about Cory for the rest of his life, that he enjoys wearing women's clothing. So that's the episode. That's Chick Like Me. And you might be seeing why I would happily call this one a trans-adjacent episode, or at the very least, queer and gender-fucky as fuck. The two big parts that I always want to consider in these aspects is both what is there, what exists and is written and acted, and also what the audience can take away from that or learn about themselves or the world through it. On the first front, there are a lot of interesting choices with the boys dressing up as girls narrative here. While it is using it in a rather common manner for gender swap episodes in kids' shows, that by becoming the other gender for a period of time, you can learn to understand what it is they go through, or how the world is different for them, it also has some rather unique moments around the way that the boys interact with their own feminine identities, becoming and being them in a way that perhaps reveals not just things about girls and about the world, but also about themselves. And while jokes are made at their expense, and the studio laughter occurs around the notion of them cross-dressing, or playing a girl, within the narrative of the show, it's not explicitly denoted as something bad or wrong by their peers. It mostly being criticised by either Cory's father not wanting to be involved with it, but also not stopping it, and Mr. Feeney being disturbed by the choice involved, which I blame more on perhaps their long-standing association with masculine identity and being fucking boomers over here, am I right? Like, all of the other kids, when the article comes out, don't have a problem with it. But as to the audience, this isn't a case of a trans person being in the narrative. I want to make that very clear. This isn't a trans episode in that sense. It has a lot more in common with Fairly Odd Parents, in that it's more an exploration of gender through the act of becoming another, and in doing that storyline it ends up speaking to a trans experience, whether it intended to or not. It ends up becoming an important reference for those who might also be looking to question their own gender identity, or who might explore it in some way, and so it becomes a cultural touchstone for those people, as a way for them to see somebody like them doing the very thing that they might not have been able to seriously consider up until that point. It's impossible to really review Boy Meets World on a case of transgender representation, but we can review it on a case of what it means to the trans community, and within that, I think you can see I have made my arguments so far throughout this video that it does offer an encouraging vision of dressing up and embodying the other gender, even if it might not be something that you are going to do in a full-time capacity or make your actual identity or it is your actual identity. And at this point I would be loath to not mention how such a thing is not just inherent to this one episode. Cross-dressing for the boys on the show happens a surprising amount. Jack and Eric, the elder brothers of Sean and Cory, both wear dresses for Season 5 Episode 4's Fraternity Row, where they do it to get into a fraternity, but then the comments that they make imply an okayness with the idea of wearing feminine outfits, of it not impinging upon their own sense of identity, and that they also own a lot of feminine outfits in their cupboards as well.
Knock yourself out.
You're pretty.
Back at you.
Hey, thank you. I don't want to talk about it, okay? Yeah, well, I do. You took that out of my closet.
The same thing is somewhat true and brought up later down the line when Eric and Jack both go fully undercover as women in Season 7's Episode 11, What a Drag, pretending to be women so they can avoid getting beaten up by another student who they busted for throwing an illegal rave. In the episode, most others treat them as women, and in the role of becoming women, they really do act as these people. As the episode progresses, it actually becomes a much deeper story in relation to transgender identity. And shit, I know we're at 7,000 words and we're looking at probably a 50-minute or hour-long video, but god damn it, this is the video about the Boy Meets World trans episode. So I'm going to do my fucking job for once, and I'm going to cover both, no matter how long it takes to make this video. So, we mentioned already, for What a Drag, how they initially got into doing drag, although I would argue this isn't exactly drag, as they're putting on the costume of a woman and identity for the purpose of hiding from a bully. Drag is more performative art than cross-dressing survival. But during the episode, we see how Eric, especially as Chantil the boy, really does get into the character of who they are. Does really align with this feminine identity, to the point that they get heavily shaken early on by Mr. Feeney criticising their looks. And okay, I'm revoking Mr. Feeney's ally card completely here. Fuck Mr. Feeney. You don't go around fucking... Even if you know that Eric is pretending to be a woman here, or is in the role of a woman here, you don't go and harass them, you piece of shit. You know, that's a bad ally. Bad Mr. Feeney.
It's Mr. Feeney. Don't be a Badinsky. It's a very long story. You will not figure it out.
What's to figure? He's pretty and you look like a bison.
What?
Double D's, just like your grades.
And so in response to both that and also the fact that Jack, as their womanly role, gets a date while Chantil does not, Chantil seeks reassurance from Topanga about herself, who reminds her that who she is not just what's on the outside, but is also in her spirit and person.
Topanga, everyone knows you. You're beautiful. You have a wonderful husband who loves you. And I'll never have a husband because I'm a shy, ugly little French girl.
No, you're not.
Topanga is 100% a best ally. See, Mr. Feeney? That's how you do it. This then leads to Jack figuring out a plan to get Luther to stop wanting to enact violence upon the duo, and decides the best way to do that is by taking pictures of Luther posed with him, so they can shame him with the idea that he was actually with a cross-dressing man when he thought it was a girl.
How you doing? Let's discuss your reputation, pal. It's you!
Hello.
Both of you!
Jack, come on, dude. What are you doing here? Are you trying to tank this episode for me? Are you trying to ruin Boy Meets World's attempts to get into the good books of the trans community by doing the exact come-uppance thing that I was worried was going to happen earlier on, and is not a nice thing because it's implying that, well, being with a cross-dresser or being with a trans person or being in that sort of like sexuality is something to be ashamed of? That's not a good thing. Boy Meets World, be better. Come on, Jack. But after this honey trap, we then find that Eric doesn't really care to go back to being a guy, while Jack is understandably excited as a cis man to not have to pretend to be a girl anymore.
Not wait to go home and get out of these clothes. Eric?
Never felt so alive in my life. I just want to...
This continues into the next scene with Jack being hyper-masculine to make up for the time he spent as a woman, while Eric is still dressed in full femme outfit and living as a woman, while also still hitting on other women. This is, at this point, not even just a little bit trans-adjacent or moderately queer. This is just a big old trans moment, and somehow it basically never gets brought up by anything I can find talking about Boy Meets World. Why has nobody ever talked about this episode more? Eric is literally openly saying how they discovered how beautiful she is and how it makes her feel, and I think also part of the feminine empowerment as well from Topanga and from clapping back at Luther has really opened a lot of doors and ideas for her in regards to what she connects with.
Discover how beautiful I was, so I decided to stay like this forever. So satisfying and rewarding to be in touch with one's feminist side.
And then the episode just ends with Eric referring to this as experimentation, and it's never brought up ever again. From what I can find about Eric in the sequel spin-off, this doesn't resolve anywhere. But that idea, that concept in itself, and the fact that while it is treated as a joke by the show and the studio audience, it is still something that is done confidently and is outlined in a way that really matches that notion of reflecting a transgender person's attitude towards themselves, or a trans woman's coming out or realization of herself, is something that I don't think anybody can take away or negate from Boy Meets World's story here. The guys in the show are willing to explore their feminine side, are willing to get in touch with that, and do so in a way that I think would be encouraging for others to go along with. They're able to be confident in that, and it does not lead to punishment or to intense mockery from other characters for those choices. It just is. And I think there is something in that which should make Boy Meets World at least a piece that gets consideration when we talk about the inclusion of transgender identity and gender queerness in media. Especially in kids media, a hot button topic right now with right-wingers loving to complain about the brainwashing going on in woke Hollywood that is trying to steal away the masculinity or femininity of the youth and leave them confused. Well, fuckers, listen up. This shit was done 30 years ago. So what have you to say about that one now? It isn't a recent thing. People were doing stuff like this decades ago. I mean, we already knew that. I know all of us already knew that. And I'm picking on people who don't actually have a logical argument or foundation, but it still just pisses me off, you know? That, like, these people are saying this stuff about right now when this has been a consistent theme for kind of all of media and all of human history as well. Like, just get better arguments. So that's Boy Meets World, and its transgender adjacent episode, or episodes. I think the biggest takeaway I could have here is that this is something that can be seen as definitely opening the doors of considering gender, and considering one's relation in regards to their own identity. In regards to how they perceive themselves in that grand performativity that they enact every day. The show might not be sitting down and saying, here's a transgender person, and here is their story, and this gives you a direct path to finding yourself, but a lot of shows couldn't do that back in the day, or didn't have the ability or experience to pull something like that off. Instead, this was a close parallel option, portrayals that are not explicit but do align with some of that trans identity that does struggle to find itself in media sometimes. I think that if you find Boy Meets World to have been a fundamental piece in your trans journey, that's perfectly valid, and I can definitely see why. There are all the building blocks here for unlocking that. And I'm kind of upset that I didn't get the chance to watch it when I was younger, because maybe my own journey might have been a little different if I'd seen shows like this. Anyways, if you like what I've said, and like what I've done here, then liking, sharing, subscribing and commenting are truly the best ways to do that. Or you could go and swap your own gender for a day just to see what it's like. That really does help the channel too. Don't ask me how it helps the channel, I don't have to explain everything to you. If you don't get it, you don't get it. If you really, really like what I do, then the best way to help me continue doing it is by going to my Patreon and subscribing there. The names of all those in the $5 and up category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I want to thank every single person on that page. They truly do make it possible for me to keep doing these videos, not just in the financial sense of providing me the money to pay for food, electricity and internet, but also in the sense that it motivates me to focus on the content, knowing that people care enough to want to pay for it. Okay, this has all gotten way too serious for the end of this video, and it's gotten very real and cutting to the core of who I am as a person. So let's just quickly do a little joke. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.